Well, to discuss that possible new truce in Gaza, I'm pleased to be joined on the line now by John Lyndon. He's the Executive Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Good afternoon to you, sir. Thanks for joining us once again.
Good to be with you.
What's your sense as to the likelihood that this new truce will get off the ground?
I'm cautiously more optimistic than the other sort of rumours that we've heard in recent weeks. I mean, partially because Bill Burns, the CIA director, was obviously heavily involved. We had key parties, Qatar and Egypt in Paris over the weekend. And we hear that the Israelis have at least given permission or a green light for this formula to be given back to Hamas for their consideration. So they're all things that weren't present in previous rounds. And I think also the sense of pressure that the situation, the humanitarian catastrophe on the ground in Gaza has reached such a terrible proportions that the key component, obviously the hostages being released, is a huge priority, but also the cessation of violence for 6 weeks, which could allow the Gaza Strip to be flooded with the aid and the food that is so needed. Pretty much every actor seems to be mobilized around that priority, and hopefully that pressure will result in something conclusive coming in the coming days.
That said, though, clearly there are obstacles that still remain, not least within Israel itself. It seems that Benjamin Netanyahu is under pressure from both sides, those Israelis who want the hostages back almost at any cost, and those on the other side, like the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who says the war must go on no matter what. How do you think Benjamin Netanyahu is going to square that circle?
I mean, he has options. Yair Lapid, who's officially the leader of the opposition, signalled on Tuesday that he would be willing to support via his votes outside the cabinet a deal that brings the hostages home. And we know that within the small war cabinet, Gadi Eisenkot and Benny Gantz have both signalled their support for a deal that prioritises the return of hostages as soon as possible. So really, Prime Minister Netanyahu needs to face down the very extremist aspects of his own governing coalition, people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who seem opposed to any kind of deal that would bring hostages home and would reduce the violence and the intensity that we're seeing in Gaza at the moment. And he said, Netanyahu, in a settlement called Ali in recent days, that he was against anything that would remove Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip or would see the return of thousands of Palestinian prisoners. And that seems incompatible with the formula we're hearing that he and his government have implicitly endorsed in recent days. So there needs to be a moment of truth here between what's politicking for one's political base and really the responsibility of leadership to not only bring home these Israeli civilians who've been held hostage for over 100 days, but also to address what is a growing catastrophe in the Gaza Strip.
Indeed, and you talk about the pressures on Netanyahu. There are, of course, also, we imagine, significant pressures on Hamas because of that enormous humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Do you think Palestinians now really want to see Hamas push for a long-term sustainable truce, or will they take what they can get and something short if that's all that's available?
I mean, we've seen protests in Gaza over the weekend calling for the release of hostages in order for it to facilitate the ceasefire that every Palestinian I know wants and is demanding as quickly as possible. So there is real anger. It's going in every direction, and we're seeing it in both Palestine and in Israel. A little bit more reflection on the failures of each respective leadership rather than just their opponents in this war. And I think I hope that Hamas will be understanding that level of pressure. I hope that also the international community are putting pressure on both parties. So obviously Israel has a responsibility as the more powerful party and the one that's currently waging war in Gaza, but Hamas fired rockets in recent days at Tel Aviv and central Israel and have been hardline on other ceasefire and hostage return formula. And sometimes there's less pressure publicly being placed upon Hamas, who have their own responsibilities here to their own people and to solving this crisis. So, I'm not going to put all the money I have in the world on betting on Hamas doing the ethical or decent thing, but I would hope that the real anger that they can feel amongst Palestinians might affect their calculations as well.
All right, really interesting. Thanks for your analysis. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you, John Lyndon, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Now let's